You bring a horse for me?
Well, looks like we're... looks like we're shy of one horse.
You brought two too many.
Hey folks, it's the Blind Guy here, and boy do we have a good one for you on this episode. Yes, it's another good old movie recommendation, and on this episode we're taking a look at 1968's Once Upon a Time in the West, directed by the great Sergio Leone. So, as you probably know, Leone directed a lot of spaghetti westerns. He was famous for his Dollars trilogy, and this one is the beginning of another trilogy, which is Once Upon a Time in the West, Duck You Sucker, and Once Upon a Time in America. So this is not related to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even though I believe that is a Tarantino homage to this movie. So this is an interesting one because Leone had sworn that he was done with westerns after he finished The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but everybody loved his westerns so much that they kept begging him to do it. He was offered to do westerns with Charlton Heston, with Kirk Douglas, but he was eventually offered the opportunity to make a western with Henry Fonda, who apparently was his favorite actor at the time. And so he decided he would give it one more go. So this is his last western of all of his movies. And he actually cast Fonda as a bad guy, which is usually not. I believe Fire Creek might be one of Fonda's only other movies where he's actually a bad guy. So that was a little interesting. And Fonda actually showed up for this movie with facial hair and brown contacts because he did not want his signature blue eyes to be shown as being a bad guy in this movie. And Leone told him, no, I want you to look exactly like Henry Fonda because I want the audience to be surprised that you are playing a bad guy. So what's the plot of this movie? This movie's interesting because the plot is hard to, it's a bit difficult to follow, especially in the American release. Although it seems like now, if you do watch this movie, you're going to see the international release, which is a good thing because the plot makes more sense in the international release. It has a few more scenes in it that seem to tie things together. It's almost like Blade Runner, where there's several versions of this movie, and I think one of them is substantially better than the rest. So the movie, of course, it's a spaghetti western, but it was filmed primarily in Spain, and it was filmed also in Utah. So let's take a look at this plot. Let's try to run this down a little bit. I'm going to try not to give away any spoilers here. So a lot of it's going to be a bit vague. It's a little convoluted, but it does make sense once you get to the end of the movie. So you have Charles Bronson's character who has come back for revenge against Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda is hired by a railroad tycoon to get land away from an Irishman. Henry Fonda is sent there by the railroad tycoon to get this land away from the Irishman. The Irishman is actually played by an Italian, and they just dyed his hair red. It is not convincing at all, but they had a lot of casting. Well, the older actors were Italian, so there's just be that as it may. That's how they had to do it. But things go terribly wrong, or there's an atrocity that's committed when Henry Fonda does this. And that causes tension between the railroad tycoon and Henry Fonda's character. And then the Irishman's wife shows up, and she's the heir to the land, even though she's a lady of the night from Louisiana. But with the atrocity happening, she's the sole heir to the land, and nobody knew that she was actually married to the Irishman. And so that's the push of the story, is you have this land the railroad wants. Henry Fonda's character wants it. Charles Bronson's character wants revenge against Henry Fonda's character. There's another bad guy who's being framed by Henry Fonda, so he wants revenge against Fonda. And then the Jill character, which is played by Claudia Cardinale, she's the prostitute from Louisiana who's the actual rightful heir to the land. So that's how chaos ensues in this movie. So let's talk about this Western. How does this work? So Sergio Leone, he brought back the famous composer Morricone, who all worked with him on the Dollars trilogy, and that's the famous music that we all know from the Gunslinger era. He's back, and he's got similar music in this one. It's actually, I think I probably like it a little bit better. So that sets the stage here. But the music's interesting because a lot of the times Leone chooses not to use any music until there's a large scene happening or some kind of violence happening. And that's really cool because what he uses is a lot of natural sounds to create kind of this almost suspense, but also a level of monotony at the same time. So you'll have like a windmill screeching over and over in the wind as characters are talking and things, and then that builds up to a scene where you do get some music. And so it's really interesting. He did this before Stanley Kubrick did it on The Shining, where he would actually have part of the composition was finished, so they would play it on set, and so the actors could actually hear the music while they were acting, and so you get some really amazing scenes that are really synced up with the score. There's a scene when Jill's character arrives in Flagstone and off the train, and then she's moving. I'll do it for your direction. She's moving this way, and the camera's following her. She goes into a building, has a conversation through the window of the building, and then the camera comes up this way as she goes out the other side of the building, and you get this massive just shot of all these people working in the town and the landscape. It's one of the most gorgeous scenes I've ever seen in a movie. It's worth watching the movie right there. The introductory scene is incredible, where Charles Bronson arrives at the train station. There's this build-up. You're waiting. It seems like it takes forever. It's like 10 minutes before the train gets there, and I won't spoil that one for you. So it's got some of the most beautiful scenes that I've ever seen in a movie. I thought a lot of it was done with matte painting, but actually it's not. The shots were actually from Monument Valley, Utah. And so when they weren't shooting in Spain, they were shooting in Utah. And they may have used some matte painting, but the ones that I thought were matte painting were actually shot in Utah. The only issues I really have with the movie is some of the scenes are drawn out, probably longer than they need to be, that they could be cut shorter. I realize that some of Leone's style in this trilogy is a very slow, drawn-out pace, and then with lots of violence and action all at once and then drawn back out again. It's a really interesting way of doing it. And so if you did cut those down, it might ruin the style a little bit. But that's one thing that does bother me a little bit. A little fun factoid, the movie actually rolled for 2 years straight in France. And I guess when Leone came to tour the theater where it was being shown, this movie was really popular in France for some reason. Where the movie was being shown, the audience was excited to see him, and the projectionist, I guess, actually threatened to kill him because he was tired of seeing the movie for 2 years straight because it's a longer movie. So I thought that was a funny story. The other issue I have with some of it is, I don't know if it's the Foley artists that did this, but you have some issues with these Italian spaghetti westerns. Is I believe the Italian actors are doing their scenes in English if you watch their lips, but because they must have really thick Italian accents because they didn't go back and redub them with American actors over the top. And so what that does is you can tell it's been redubbed, and you get some pretty awkward sound effects at times, like slaps. Sound really bad. People falling on the ground sound pretty bad. I noticed that in the Dollars trilogy as well. So I think it's an Italian spaghetti western thing where they have American actors speaking their lines. They get redubbed as well, but it's the same actors doing it. But then like Claudia's lines, they were all redubbed by another actress, an American actress. So I'm guessing it's because their accents are probably too thick and wouldn't make a lot of sense. So there is that aspect. That's just a spaghetti western thing. If you notice it, it'll probably start bothering you. So I guess forget I said that and just don't let it bother you. But those are two of my issues with it. But some of the facial shots in this movie are incredible. Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda. Leone likes to do a lot of the up close eye shots and things like that. It's just an excellent movie. Highly recommended. It's a little violent. Another fun factoid is my mom absolutely hates this movie. It's got some things in it that she just does not like in movies. Some of the violence and just some of the darkness of this movie really bothers my mom. It doesn't have any car chases or drum solos, but still not her cup of tea. But as a piece of history, this thing is absolutely incredible. Another thing that bothers me a little bit in this movie is you have a theme with Charles Bronson's character, where he's called Harmonica is his name. And he plays a harmonica at any time when there's going to be a judgment type scene or a revenge type scene. And the movie's implying that the musical score with the harmonica in it is what he's playing on the harmonica. But if you watch him, there's like no way that that's what he's playing on the harmonica. It's just it doesn't match up with how much so when you play a harmonica, if you have a larger interval in the music, you've got to move the harmonica quite a bit to cover that interval. And the score has that interval in it, but he's like got it up to his lips and it's just moving like maybe a whole step or a half step back and forth. I don't know why they didn't bother trying to tell him, you're going to have to move it this way and then this way to make it look convincing, but it just doesn't look good at all. I think actors today, most actors today would just learn the harmonica piece, almost like Jeffrey Rush learned how to play the piano pieces and shine. But I think at this time and point in Hollywood, I think actors a lot of the time just showed up and just did their parts. And so I'm sure Charles Bronson was not interested in learning how to fake the harmonica parts. But other than that, those are just really small, nitpicky things. The movie scores an 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, very high. That's probably pretty close just because of its impact on if you look at the number of directors this thing impacted, from Scorsese to George Lucas to Tarantino, which I'm not as big of a fan of. But I just think that the amount of impact this thing had on Hollywood, it probably deserves around that 8.5 range. I need to get a copy of it to make sure I have it in case it ever gets hard to see. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by using the link in the description to get to this movie. If you use that link and buy other things on Amazon, it still supports the channel. We are almost to 100 subscribers. I think we have 10 more to go or something like that. So if we can get to 100 subscribers, I'll do the 100 subscriber challenge. If you want to sponsor a video, send me an email using the email description or the email address in the video description, and I'll watch a movie if you want. I'll review a board game if you want. Just let me know, and we can set something up. I've got some more product reviews coming, but I want to do this good old movie. This is an excellent movie. I highly recommend you check it out. Get some popcorn, invite some friends over, and have yourself a good time with one of the greatest Westerns ever made. And that is Sergio Leone's 1968 Once Upon a Time in the West. Thank you all for your support, and I'll see you on the next episode of A Blind Guy's View. Laters on the Menjay.
Laters on the Menjay.